It's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
Welcome to The New Next, a podcast that addresses current events and how they will impact the future. So now all of a sudden, I was afraid it was going to be that inexpensive because now all of these bad scenarios are coming in my mind. And so I guess the first one would be IP, intellectual property. If not that I really care about it personally as much, but this is a way that a lot of people are able to, because they don't necessarily do a whole lot of things that are unique. Who owns the IP? Does your company own the IP if I hire you for the $50 a month, or do I still get to keep it, since I might be giving the basics, but you're giving the stuff that makes it make sense?
And when you ask about IP, are you talking about the outputted like text?
Yeah. So if like
you're still the creator though, so it's kind of like taking like someone hires you as a photographer to take a picture of them. Like you're still interacting with this other sense, but you're still the one that's creating the framework where this output exists.
Right, but the photographer still keeps credit of the photos.
And you are the photographer in this scenario, because you're the one that's using the tool to create the output.
So, and part of it, unless without playing with it, I can't really. Obviously, it's harder to think. I guess I'm worried about plagiarism, and I'm worried about is there a reverse version of this where professors, people in that kind of community, where they can go back and say how much of this is the thoughts of my students as opposed to the thoughts of Matt Jensen wrote a great book. I want to make sure they're just not regurgitating Matt Jensen, but they're actually putting at least some good 12th grade thought into it, or sophomore year of college thought into it.
Yeah, I mean that question is going to be huge starting now and going forward. The way that these models work, at least GPT-3, what we call a large language model, it basically statistically tries to figure out what the most likely word comes after everything else that came before it. One of the early things that they showed how the algorithm worked is they would take a paragraph, cut off the last couple words, and then say, finish this paragraph, and it would figure it out, and it would make total sense. So, I mean, at this basist level, it's a statistical model that tries to figure out what fits in the gap. And so if we take that up a level, it's interesting to think about what that means. You basically have taken a bunch of information on the internet and said, somebody asked me for this, go take in all of this data and make something that kind of matches what they asked for based on all the things we know. So it's based on a bunch of stuff that's already been written. But it's not like cutting and pasting bits out of like Shakespeare and Reddit and Twitter and things like that. It learned based off of all of that, but it's not a direct copy paste. And so there's some really, I think, interesting questions and maybe tough legal questions. And Matt, you and I talked about GitHub Copilot a little bit before about, what does it mean if somebody outputs it was the best of times, it was the worst of times. It's not like it copied the beginning of the book. It said, hey, this seems like statistically something important based on what you asked me for. And so there is kind of that question of, okay, well, was that an IP infringement because it was similar to something, or is it just always emergent and new because it's a random algorithm, or it's not random, but statistical algorithm. So
Yeah, I kind of think about it as like, say someone grew up and they just love Neil Diamond. So they play Neil Diamond all day, then they learn how to play the music. And they were in a Neil Diamond cover band for a while in college. And when they got out of college, they started writing their own music, but kind of since they had been playing Neil Diamond for so long, they kind of had that style of Neil Diamond. So even in some of the cases with some of this GPT framework, some of the image sort of stuff with Dolly and stuff like that, you can be like, produce me an image in the style of Van Gogh. And essentially they're doing kind of the same thing that you would be doing if you had spent your whole life kind of imitating and stylizing your own style after someone that you respected. So it's kind of cool that it can wear infinite hats in that way. And like, you know, my mind kind of, or I forcefully try to wander my mind sometimes thinking about what this gives the capability for someone to produce, where you're like, hey, let me test out to see how I could create something in the style that's not related to anything that I've done before.
And I think the art example in that brought up is kind of one of the easiest to visualize in terms of your question, because you can ask it to make things that look like a living artist, somebody that you would pay to generate a new piece of art for you or something like that. And there was a podcast recently with the CEO of Stability, which does Stable Diffusion, which is another image generation similar to Dolly. And they're talking about this because artists have started to say, hey, I don't know that I want you to be able to imitate me in your platform. And so that they're starting to think about, okay, how do we build tools on top of our algorithm to allow people to opt out of their data? You know, don't train anything on my data. Don't allow people to ask for my type of work. And so, you know, because we're so early in this, it is kind of the Wild West where we're training on anything we can get our hands on. And now we're starting to have to think about, you know, what are the realities? How do we fit this into, you know, into business, to normal society, to where there are rules, there are limitations. It just so happens that those, you know, laws and limitations were written when this type of technology didn't exist. And so
yeah,
I mean, it's very similar to, you know, having the internet come online and people realize that our laws are not written for that, right?
That's right. If you would like to learn more about the New Next podcast, find us at thenewnextpodcast.com, where you can suggest a topic you would like for us to cover. If you enjoyed what you heard, share the podcast, tell a friend about it, or rate us with 5 stars.